Duke has never beaten FSU in football. Will they change that this weekend? Head coach Mike Elko has figured out what it takes to win football games. Duke's been outgained in terms of yardage in each of their 3 big matchups this season, but they've outscored those same opponents 64-31. They've mostly done that on the back of one of the better statistical defenses in the country, and a quarterback who's been downright electric at times. Leonard is one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in all of college football. His size makes him tough to bring down, and his speed is deceptive enough to make him dangerous when he turns a corner. In fact, he has the second highest yards per carry among quarterbacks this season. His running ability opens up opportunities for his teammates. Here, 2 Clemson players are staying behind to account for Leonard, which opens up a huge gap for Jordan Waters to run through. Unfortunately, Leonard suffered a high ankle sprain at the end of their game against Notre Dame. However, they have a lot of confidence in backup Henry Belin IV. What's interesting about Belin is on paper he has similar attributes to Leonard. After all, they're both mobile quarterbacks, but the way they used him in his only start against NC State was very different from how they've used Leonard. With Leonard behind center, a lot of their run game went through him, but Belin didn't get nearly the same number of carries. Leonard's pass game tended to revolve around allowing him to sustain long drives with reliable short completions. Belin, on the other hand, didn't make nearly as many attempts, but when he did, he was way more likely to push the ball downfield. You can see that trend in this chart, showing the passing distribution by game. In this first column, you can see the average distance the ball traveled in the air per passing attempt. With Leonard, that number tended to hover around 7 to 9 yards per pass, and you can see these green categories that represent a large portion of his passes over that period were under 10 yards downfield. In contrast, Belin's first and only start featured an absurd 17.2 average air yards per attempt, with 75% of his passes going further than 10 yards. And you can kind of understand why when you see that on short throws, he was only 1 for 3 for 3 yards. It seems like under Belin, they didn't really trust him to move the ball consistently using underneath throws, so they instead had to get creative with the run game to get the ball moving. Their run game is generally pretty multiple, but one thing they do often that stands out is to run a healthy amount of what's called pin and pull. Pin and pull is just like any other gap scheme, like counter, where there are some players that block down or pin their defenders, and some players that pull across the line of scrimmage. What makes pin and pull different is that it adapts depending on defensive formation. Instead of set lineman pulling, any lineman can pull if they're not covered up by a defender. Here, the play side tackle and the backside guard don't have anyone lined up head up or inside of them, so they pull and everybody else pins. They added a cool wrinkle to their run game in the NC State game. They ran a ton of what's called tackle over, where one tackle lines up on the opposite side of the ball that they usually do, which often messes with the defense who wants to align on the ball. If they do that, they'll be out-leveraged to the 2 tackle side. Defenses also have to watch this tight end. Since he's aligned where an ineligible tackle usually is, it's possible he gets lost in the shuffle on passing plays. Their offense has been just good enough to win them games this year, but where they really make their money is on the defensive side of the ball. Florida State fans should be somewhat familiar with Duke's defense because their defensive coordinator comes off the Elko tree. The biggest similarity between the two is the tendency to play a decent amount of man coverage and align in light boxes, where there's enough offensive blockers to block all the defenders in the box with no one to directly account for the running back. This generally places a lot of pressure on defensive linemen to win their matchups to cover for their lack of numbers. Duke's line is up to the task. They rotate their defensive linemen often, and it pays off with an active unit that does a good job of closing up their gaps. But in reality, they only play a light box and pre-snap appearance only. They like to roll the safety down late, which presents a light box to the offense and coaxes them into running the ball. The safety then collapses hard and helps add numbers to stop the run game. This late roll isn't perfect, and if you can hit the gap quick enough like Clemson was able to do, then you can generate a fairly successful run game. Behind the front is a secondary that's been among the best in the country in terms of yards per passing attempt and opposing passing rating, currently ranking in the top 5 in both categories. When they're not playing man coverage, which they run about a third of the time, Duke often tries to dissuade the pass with drop 8 coverages, where only 3 linemen rush, and they flood the passing lanes with zone defenders. In general, this isn't a very aggressive team. They're 126th in blitz rate and really seem to focus on stopping the more efficient play, the pass. To me, that's a matchup that will determine the game. FSU has had its up and downs in terms of beating man coverage, and they'll get a tough test on Saturday. Notre Dame has really been the only team that's been able to generate explosives against this defense. Most of these were done by isolating big-bodied tight ends in space on a linebacker or safety. FSU may be able to take notes from that game by targeting their athletic tight end Jaheim Bell, but if they want to truly open up things for the offense, they'll need to hit some shots to Keon Coleman or Johnny Wilson on the outside. If they don't, then Duke is going to force them to take slow, methodical drives and then convert those drives in the red zone. Duke's been one of the best teams in the country at preventing scores in the red zone. Part of that can be explained through some fortunate turnover luck against Clemson, and part of this may be because how they rotate defensive linemen, choosing to keep their best fresh for the yards that really matter. It's not something they're really particularly good at last season, so it'll be interesting to see if this small sample size continues throughout the season. But as of now, this will be strength on strength for the two teams. FSU is conversely one of the best red zone scoring offenses. The team that capitalizes on these situations will likely like what they see on the scoreboard when the clock hits 0. Personally, I think this is a fascinating matchup. An explosive offense versus a defense who hasn't really given up explosives all year. When FSU is on defense, they'll have a challenge in stopping whichever quarterback takes the field. But it's generally a matchup that FSU should be able to limit. These kinds of defensive matchups are always closer than one might expect. Duke has this uncanny ability to keep teams out of the end zone, and at the end of the day, points are the only thing that matters in this game. That strategy paid off in Duke's game against Clemson, and FSU has to tread carefully if they want to stay perfect against the Blue Devils. Thanks for watching. If you're a Duke fan, let me know how I did in the comments below. I'm sure I missed something important about your team, so I'd love to know more about y'all. For the FSU fans, make sure to like and subscribe and join me over on Knowles247 while I'll be trying to further the conversation. Thanks.